I'm James Miranda.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 3, A Thief in the Night. December 15th, 2020. It was nearly 0230 hours as the last lines were being cast off from the USS Nimitz. Captain Terry Pearl's heart raced. He'd been preparing for this day for some time. There was only a skeleton crew aboard, since Pearl had given shore leave passes to those he thought might not side with him. Generally, everyone left on the Nimitz viewed Sachs as an illegitimate dictator. Captain Pearl smiled. It was as if Mother Nature had seen fit to assist them in their scheme. The area was being blanketed in a shroud of fresh snow, which severely cut down on visibility around the carrier. This gave them extra time to get the ship disconnected and have the tug start pulling away from the pier before anyone else even noticed that anything out of the ordinary was happening. Slowly and steadily, the ship pulled away until it became safe for the captain to have their own propulsion help to get them moving. Now it was a race against time. They needed to travel up Puget Sound to the Canadian Naval Base CFB Eskimo, roughly 100 miles north. Captain Terry Pearl kept scanning the horizon for where he knew the main gate to be, watching and waiting, somewhat patiently and somewhat afraid that the plan had fallen apart. Then the sight he had been waiting for manifested before him. One explosion broke the dark night sky, then another, then two more. 4 mortar rounds had smashed into the area, 3 of them landing near the piers where some of the destroyers were tied up. The officers on watch on the remaining ships would scramble and put the ships to sea, hoping to protect their vessels from further attack. They'd come back to fetch their crews later. Pearl laughed, realizing that the reaction was a bit inappropriate, but he didn't care. Right on time, he thought. The captain lowered his high-powered binoculars and turned to one of his radio men. "Send a flash message out to the destroyers and to the base," he ordered. "Tell them we're putting to sea to protect the ships. Ask that they arrange for the Coast Guard to come to our assistance, in case there are additional attacks being organized against the fleet." And just like that, our little coup d'etat will slip away under escort to the Canadian side of the border, Pearl thought with a mischievous smile. Arlington, Virginia, Pentagon. Secretary of Defense McElroy reached for his smartphone as he climbed into the armored Suburban for the quick ride to the Pentagon. He'd been woken out of a sound night's sleep 10 minutes ago by the watch officer at the National Military Command Center, or NMCC, who told him that a mortar attack was underway at Naval Station Bremerton. At first, McElroy thought it was a dream, but when the duty officer had told him his security detail was being instructed to bring him to the Pentagon, the SecDef had realized that the situation was all too real. Acting hurriedly, he'd thrown some clothes on and rushed out the door to find a vehicle already waiting for him. "What the hell is going on?" McElroy barked into the phone. The Suburban sped away from his home with its lights on to help cut through the early morning traffic. The voice on the other end replied, "The base has received 2 separate mortar attacks, sir. The first one consisted of 4 mortar rounds and started about 15 minutes ago. The second attack consisted of 16 mortars and just finished." "Do we know who launched the attack? Or what type of mortars were used? Was anyone hurt?" McElroy peppered the poor man on the other end of the call with questions. He grabbed for the handle above the passenger door as his driver briefly swerved around a car that had pulled out in front of them. As he sat there, listening to the report, McElroy's stomach tightened at the realization of the damage 16 mortars had probably done to the base. It appeared they had been trying to target the ships tied up at the port in an effort to damage or disable them before they could put to sea to enforce the president's naval blockade of Canada. A few minutes went by, and then his vehicle pulled up to the executive entrance of the Pentagon. His door was held open for him by his security detail. McElroy stayed on the phone, being fed information as he weaved his way through the maze of the building down to the NMCC. As soon as he walked into the massive room, McElroy zigzagged through the busy beehive of desk clumps over to the duty officer. "Colonel, how the hell did this happen?" the SecDef yelled. "Did any of our ships get damaged?" The USS Stockdale, one of the Arleigh Burke destroyers, took a direct hit to the forward missile magazine during the second mortar attack. The round caused one of the warheads to detonate, which caused a series of secondary explosions. The officer shook his head as he explained. "It completely ripped the ship apart, sir. They don't think anyone survived the explosion." "Damn it," thought McElroy. "Did they hit the Nimitz?" the SecDef asked. The officer shook his head. "No, sir. It appears the captain was able to get the ship underway fast enough that when the second wave of mortars hit the pier area, they were already out of the way." "Thank God," McElroy said in relief. That would have been an even bigger disaster had they landed a few rounds on the carrier. What other damage has the base sustained? And what about the other ships that were there? Several of the other destroyers took some damage when the Stockdale blew up, but they're all underway and, for the moment, out of harm's way. As to the damage to the rest of the base, they're currently assessing it. They alerted the Army over at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and they're scrambling a quick reaction force to head over to the naval base. The base commander also placed Bremerton on high alert and is getting a number of their helicopters airborne to make sure they don't fall victim to the same type of attack. The Secretary of Defense shook his head in disbelief. "I want to know who carried out this attack, and I want them found!" McElroy shouted in a voice so loud the walls seemed to shake. The president would be demanding answers any minute now, and they needed to have something to tell him. Joint Base Lewis McChord, I Corps HQ. Lieutenant General Andrew Biggs looked at the status of his forces in a depressed state. 2 hours into the base-wide recall, and 2.5 hours after the mortar attack, the individual readiness numbers were still showing less than 80%. A sick feeling started to settle into the pit of his stomach. What if that remaining 20% isn't coming because they've switched sides? He worried. That was the last thing on earth he needed. The SecDef had called him personally to rally up his command and prepare them to defend the naval facilities in the local area, along with his own base, should they be attacked again. That was quite possibly the most unpleasant phone call of his life, and he wasn't interested in seeing what would happen if McElroy became even more displeased. Biggs calculated his options in his head, then found the man he was looking for, Major General Scott Stevens. "General, I want you to start getting your striker battalions rolling to the naval facilities immediately, before we start running into the morning rush hour," he ordered. "Secure the naval facilities in the J.B. Lewis McChord area. Live ammo is to be issued, and the use of deadly force has been authorized by the Secretary of Defense." "Yes, sir," Stevens replied. He began issuing orders to his various unit commanders. Tentative rules of engagement had been disseminated, and they all began working like a well-oiled machine, as if this were just another drill. As they headed out, General Biggs hoped that this attack at Bremerton hadn't been the precursor to something more nefarious. The country was already at such a precarious tipping point. As it was, more than 200 naval personnel had been killed already, and twice that many injured. USS Nimitz. It was now 07:42 hours, and the light of the new day was starting to brush aside the darkness, though the sky was still overcast with snow flurries that were supposed to continue for another hour or so. Rear Admiral Harold Ward joined Captain Terry Pearl out on the flying bridge. "Are we ready?" asked Ward. Captain Pearl nodded. "I sure hope this works, sir. Otherwise, they'll hang us for sure." Admiral Ward sighed. "Removing the Nimitz from the chessboard will hopefully cause the President to see reason. He needs to know that the entire military is not drinking his Kool-Aid. A reset needs to happen." "I know," Captain Pearl responded. "I just hope history judges us kindly." His mood was remarkably more somber than it had been earlier in the day. He paused for a moment as he looked out at the Canadian coast. They'd be turning to head toward the Canadian base soon. "You heard the Stockdale took an unlucky direct hit to her missile compartment?" he asked. A look of sadness appeared on Ward's face as he nodded. "I did. God, I wish those guys had been more accurate with those mortars. They were supposed to hit in the vicinity of the piers, not strike the ships that were tied up. I have a feeling this whole situation is about to turn real ugly, sir. What'll we do if the President orders a SEAL team or the Marines to try and recapture the ship?" asked Pearl. "We don't have a big contingent of people on board that can defend it." "Once we cross into Canada, I've been told the Canadians, Germans, and French have some soldiers and sailors that will come aboard. They'll help augment our missing sailors and Marines for security," Admiral Ward responded. Joint Base Lewis McChord, I Corps HQ. Lieutenant General Andrew Biggs was on a secured video teleconference with the Pentagon when an aide walked into the room and brought him a note. He quickly read it, then looked up at the messenger, asking, "Has this been verified?" The man nodded and then slipped out of the room, leaving those in attendance wondering what had just transpired. With all eyes turned toward him, Biggs cleared his throat. I just received a flash message from one of the Coast Guard ships and confirmed by one of the destroyer escorts who was racing to catch up to the carrier. They were escorting the Nimitz out to sea to get them out of danger." He paused awkwardly for a moment. "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to spit it out. Instead of continuing out of Puget Sound and into the Pacific, the Nimitz turned and crossed into Canadian waters. They're currently taking up station outside the Canadian Naval Base, CFB Eskimo. It would appear the carrier has turned on their defensive weapon systems." A collective gasp filled the room. Then a voice came across the video call. "Everyone except Biggs and his key staff, vacate the room immediately." There was a scuffle as everyone grabbed their belongings and exited the room without a word. Then a silence fell over the room. The President was front and center on the video conference, visibly simmering. His nostrils were flared, and his face was flushed. Biggs wondered if he was about to punch something. Sachs took a couple of deep breaths, as if to steel his nerves. "General, do you still have control of your base and the men and women of your command?" he finally asked. General Biggs sat up even straighter. "I sure as hell do, Mr. President. I've ordered the base to be placed on lockdown, and I have multiple Stryker battalions en route to the various naval bases in the area, as well as the Air Force bases. I have helicopters armed and circling our facilities, ready to attack anyone that attempts to carry out a similar type of attack. My command stands ready to execute any combat orders you wish to issue." Letting out a sigh of relief, the President nodded. "I didn't mean to insult you, General, but I needed to know if another shoe was going to drop. Thank you for getting your units spun up and ready to deal with whatever may be coming next. Right now, I need you to start identifying potential threats to your facility and the state of Washington from this UN force." He paused briefly. "I also need to know what forces you need shifted over to help you defend the state, should it come to that. I'll have my staff send over a request for any additional support we'll need to the SecDef. Biggs replied. "Presently, Mr. President, my primary concern is figuring out who launched the attacks on Bremerton. It could have been special forces units from one of the UN member state militaries across the border, or it could have been a rogue National Guard unit. My other worry is that according to most recent reports, roughly 22% of our soldiers haven't responded to the recall. I have no idea where they are, but they're currently listed as AWOL. I fear they could be in the process of crossing over to the other side." Several groans filled the room. The president shook his head, then turned to face his SecDef, McElroy. "You need to check with our other ship commanders and our Air Force base commanders, and make sure we don't have any other major capital assets deciding they want to fly off to Canada," he ordered. "I also need an assessment of what you all think they are going to do with that carrier. Are they really intent on using it against our forces, or are they just trying to neutralize it from being used against them?" Yes, sir. I will personally call all of the Carrier Strike Group commanders and the carrier commanders immediately," McElroy stammered. He seemed to have been caught off guard. He cleared his throat, then continued more strongly. "I'm also going to get with the Marines and make sure they're solidly with us, and then make sure they're keeping an eye on their Navy counterparts." The Attorney General, Malcolm Wright, added, "We need to issue arrest warrants for these sailors and make it known that they have betrayed their oath of office. They've committed an open act of treason against their country and will be held accountable." The president nodded in agreement. "Make it happen," Sachs ordered, "and make sure it's widely publicized, too. We need this to be a deterrent. Oh, and make sure to terminate the paychecks of those officers and enlisted personnel. I am not about to keep paying them. If their families don't have money, then they should have thought about that before they committed treason." Mount Vernon, Washington, I-5 near Fish Creek. "Hurry up! We don't have much time to get those charges ready. That convoy is less than 10 minutes away," yelled Lieutenant Willie Yank. The two soldiers underneath the bridge did what they could to speed up their process. They were nearly done attaching their blocks of C4 to the undercarriage of the I-5 bridge that crossed Fish Creek. Their experience as an engineering unit in the Washington State National Guard was finally being put to good use, along with all the weapons and explosives they'd snatched before jumping out of their guard unit to join the Washington CDF. Lieutenant Yank looked around nervously. The snow was starting to let up, which meant that the convoy of soldiers heading toward them would be able to spot them from much farther away. "It's done. Let's get out of here," one of the soldiers announced. He slid on his butt and feet down the side of the bridge embankment to the frozen creek below. "Back to the trucks. We've got 2 more bridges to drop before the Army catches on to what we're doing," Lieutenant Yank ordered. His motley crew of 4 guys raced down the frozen river to their pickup truck roughly half a mile away. Despite the fact that they slipped and slid through the snow and ice, they managed to make it back before the convoy got to them. When they got to their vehicle, Yank climbed into the bed of the truck and stood up for a better view. One of his other soldiers held a radio-controlled detonator in his right hand and a pair of binoculars in the other hand. "Here they come," the soldier announced. "I'm going to let a couple of vehicles cross before I blow it. That way we'll nail a couple of them." Lieutenant Yank took a couple of deep breaths, realizing his comrade was counting the strikers as they crossed over. Even without his binoculars, Yank could tell that there was also a fair bit of the normal civilian traffic on the bridge. He felt a twinge of sadness as he realized that some innocent bystanders would inevitably be killed in the blast. "Hurry up and do it! We need to get out of here," he barked anxiously, not wanting to be there any longer than he had to. He didn't like the idea of killing non-soldiers, but he reasoned that this was war, and in war, people died, even civilians. The man holding the detonator depressed the red button, and in a fraction of a second, A short burst message was sent to the receiver attached to the blasting caps. Boom! One loud, enormous explosion went off, throwing a Toyota Camry some 20 feet into the air along with chunks of the bridge. One of the strikers fishtailed from the shockwave of the explosion before rolling over on its side. Another striker couldn't stop in time and flew right off the missing portion of the bridge, only to crash down into the frozen creek below. The remaining vehicles on the bridge slammed on their brakes, tires screeching loud enough to echo all the way to their vantage point. However, at the speeds they were traveling, and with the roads still a bit snowy and wet, these evasive maneuvers weren't enough to stop another 12 civilian cars and semi-trucks from sliding off the bridge. 2 more military vehicles also crashed into the icy waters below. "Good job, guys. Now let's go drop the next bridge," Lieutenant Yank announced. He jumped down from the bed of the truck and walked over to the passenger side door. J.B. Lewis McCord, I-Corps HQ. "Here are the latest casualty reports, sir," a captain announced as he handed Major General Scott Stevens a document. 14 soldiers were killed in the crash, another 18 injured. 18 civilians were also killed in the subsequent pile-up, along with another 32 injured. "Send a message over to the battalion commander," General Stevens ordered. "Tell him to get the rest of his troopers back on the road to Whidbey Island. We need to make sure that facility is fully secured. Also send a flash message over to the base commander at Whidbey. Tell him someone dropped the I-5 bridge at Fish Creek and hit our convoy. He needs to send out whatever forces necessary to secure the bridge crossings at Deception Pass Bridge, or his base will be cut off. Understood?" "Copy that, sir. I'll make sure they know what's happening," the young man replied. Then he rushed off to get in touch with the naval station. General Stevens felt a burning pain in his chest, accompanied by a twinge of nausea. "Damn reflux is acting up again," he thought. Stress always seemed to make it worse. If he didn't take care of it now, the pain would just keep getting worse until it felt like he was having a heart attack. He opened up the top drawer and rummaged around until he found the roll of Tums he was searching for. He popped 3 and hoped for the best. Someone knocked on the door to his office. He looked up to see commanders of the 16th Combat Aviation Brigade and the 201st Expeditionary Military Intelligence Brigade. He'd been waiting for their arrival. Stevens smiled. "It's good to see you, Bob. Justin, come on in," he said, motioning for them to come sit down. "Sorry it took us a while to get over here, sir. We've had some maintenance issues that needed my attention. Plus, I appear to have a pair of Apaches and a Chinook that have gone missing," Colonel Bob Barr said angrily as he took a seat. An aide walked in with a fresh pot of coffee and a couple of extra mugs. He placed them on the table and retreated, closing the door behind him. "Before we go any further with what I need to put out to you guys, tell me about the 3 missing helicopters. What's going on?" asked General Stevens. He decided against drinking any coffee at the moment, but made a motion to offer some to his guests. Colonel Barr sighed. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it, General. I think they took their helicopters and went AWOL. These weren't even the same crews that normally flew together. When the alert went out, they were already at the flight line, like they knew in advance that it was going to happen. They jumped into their helicopters and were armed and airborne in record time. At first, we thought it was because they were the duty crew that was on alert, but they weren't. They claimed to have been in the area when the alert went out when they reported in, and with all the stuff going on, no one thought anything unusual about it. They jumped in their helicopters and just took off. In the beginning, the 2 Apaches and a Chinook full of soldiers looked like they were heading over to Naval Air Station Whidbey Island to provide them with support. However, they flew right over the base and just kept going north. They flew up to the Canadian Naval Base and set down there. "This isn't right, sir. I think this must be an inside job. Someone helped to coordinate this entire thing," Colonel Justin Bryant added angrily. "They engineered an attack at Bremerton that would flush the ships out to sea, so they could just cross right over into Canadian waters without anyone being the wiser. Then, These pilots and soldiers just happen to be in the area when the alert goes out, so they're the first ones in the air, and then they cross over. Throw in this group of saboteurs dropping part of the I-5 bridge over Fish Creek, preventing our QRF from getting over to augment the Naval Air Station or Customs and Border Protection Station at the border, and it just doesn't add up, sir. Great. I have a coup in my own ranks, thought General Stevens indignantly. Colonel Bryant, I need a frank assessment. You're my intelligence arm, my eyes and ears for what's happening around us. Is the base under threat? Stevens asked. And if so, what kind of force are we being attacked by? Is this some sort of militia group? Rogue elements of our own force? Or are these foreign troops from that UN force across the border? Bryant paused momentarily, seeming to search for what to say. I'm not sure. I've tasked my intelligence guys with talking with the local police and anyone they can think of off base and in the surrounding area. They're trying to kick the bushes and turn over some rocks to see what they can find. Some of the local police and sheriff groups are more helpful than others. Until we get lucky and either capture some of these guys in the act or catch a break in the case, I'm not going to have a lot of those answers. General Stevens turned to his aviation commander. Barr, I need you to get your surveillance drones up. Have them patrolling the major highways. Pay special attention to the bridges, he ordered. Also, start getting some surveillance up along the border. I want to know what's going on up there. We need to stay frosty and be ready for whatever may be coming our way. He tapped his pencil on his desk while he contemplated next steps, then suddenly blurted out, Let's start to issue weapons and live ammo to everyone. I want the base fully armed and ready in case there's another attack. I'm not going to lose soldiers because they weren't prepared. Washington, D.C., J. Edgar Hoover Building, FBI Headquarters. Director Nolan Polanski sat in the briefing room outside his office, looking over a collection of data points, social media posts, and various cyber intrusions, trying to understand what it all meant. Assistant Deputy Director Ashley Bonhoff pointed to one of the documents. Mr. Director, you can see from this post, whoever is behind this is doing exactly what we saw happen during the October 24th attacks. They're taking one or two situations and recasting them as something different than what they really are. Then they're using social media to propagate it through various news feeds and groups that people follow. They're essentially taking an otherwise unknown situation, something no one would have cared about, and weaponizing it for different groups of people to rile them up into taking an action they otherwise wouldn't take. Polanski furrowed his brow. So you're saying that whoever is behind these social media campaigns is manufacturing fake outrage in order to gin up real outrage? He asked incredulously. Ashley nodded her head. That's exactly what I'm saying. Someone or some group is using social media to stir up passions in people to get them to bring about an outcome they want. Let me show you something else, she said, as she pulled a couple of other papers out with some different posts on them. This one here, she said, holding it out for him to look at, is targeted at a conservative audience. It says that Senator Tate is working with the UN to take over our government, that they're going to come and take our guns. This post is being boosted and propagated via bots, specifically targeting individuals who are members of the NRA or have expressed views that indicate they're a part of a group that supports the Second Amendment. Polanski held a hand up to slow her down. Whoa! How exactly are they doing that? And how are they able to identify information on that granular of a level on individual people? Through Facebook, Google, Amazon, and other major websites. All these groups have been collecting data on every single person in the United States, and really the world, for years. All that data is then used to build a social profile of each individual person. Through behavioral analytics, marketers can engineer ads that are specifically tailored to exactly what you'll respond to. They're targeting both liberal and conservative groups with these posts. I have to surmise that the goal of all this is simply an attempt to divide the country and turn us on each other in a violent fashion." Polanski grunted at the synopsis. "I'd say they've succeeded in doing exactly that." He let out a sigh, then turned to look at his deputy. "Joe, what's your take on all of this?" "I was skeptical at first, but to be honest, after seeing all this put together and looking at past posts and messages being boosted by some of these groups, I think Ashley is onto something. I had some people look at where a lot of these posts are coming from, backtracing the IP addresses and messages. Oddly, a lot of them are being pushed by either shell corporations or people who appear to be Americans, but in reality are foreigners." "What?" Polanski asked skeptically. "They've come from a variety of places," Joe answered. "So far, we've managed to track the IPs to Russia, Germany, Norway, France, Macedonia, Greece, Cyprus, and, of course, China. The NSA and the CIA are trying to narrow it down to specific people, but have yet to firmly land on anything. It's only a matter of time, though. From what I was told by our agency rep, they have dozens of their special operations group teams carrying out raids and snatch and grabs all over the globe right now, trying to find out what the heck is going on." Polanski shook his head in frustration. "Look, this whole thing is a mess. What I need you guys to do is figure out how to best explain this in layman's terms, with some charts or pictures or whatever you need, so it can be easily digested by the average person. We need to get this over to the AG and the White House ASAP. We have to get this information distributed throughout the government and the military, and eventually out to the public, so we can nip this in the bud before the entire country fractures. I fear we may already be too late. But we as the FBI owe it to the President and the American people to present what we know." With his marching orders issued, Joe and Ashley left to get to work on putting together the information they had up to this point for the DOJ and the White House. As they left, Director Polanski ran his fingers through his hair and then sat with his face in his hands, resting his head as he pondered the situation. "I just hope we aren't too late," he thought. Chapter 4. A Nation Divided. December 17th, 2020. Washington, D.C. White House. Looking into the cameras, the president did his best to remain calm. He looked at the teleprompter and saw the words for his speech, ready to be delivered to the nation and the world. In another moment, the lights would turn on and they would signal to him that they were live. 3, 2, 1. My fellow Americans, the last 6 months, and in particular the last 8 weeks, have seen an unprecedented level of violence, disinformation, and outright manipulation of our nation. In a few minutes, the Director of the FBI, the Director of the CIA, and the Attorney General will outline what can only be described as an all-out attack on our nation. For decades, special interest groups and wealthy donors have sought to influence the levers of power in our government. This manipulation and control first started with campaign contributions. However, as we entered the 21st century, money became less influential. The new currency became data. Information about each individual in our country, including you. He paused for a moment to let that last part sink in before he continued. Through a Herculean effort by the FBI, CIA, and NSA, we have uncovered a plot by foreign actors to leverage the power of social media against you and our government. They have used carefully created, extremely detailed personal data profiles of Americans to turn us against each other. The FBI will explain in detail exactly how that has happened, and the CIA and NSA will follow up with an analysis of the groups and nations that have been involved in this conspiracy against the American people. What I can tell you now is that we as a country have been duped and coerced into fighting against each other, when we should be coming together as one people to stand against these outside factions that are striving to destroy us. America has been a prosperous and generous country that has continually stood up for freedom and been a beacon of hope to the hopeless. In the 20th century, we stood firm against the destructive forces of fascism and communism. Now, in the 21st century, we must stand together against those who are looking to divide our nation and loot our wealth and our people. Sadly, there are forces within our own government who are part of this conspiracy. Some who are even part of my administration, who have sought to undermine our government and have aligned themselves with these outside groups. Most of you are aware that Rear Admiral Harold Ward, the commander of the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, along with roughly 500 sailors, betrayed our country and their oath of office and sailed our carrier off to join this UN peacekeeping force. Sadly, a small portion of our military has also aligned themselves with this group of traitors and fled to Canada to join the growing UN army. The President looked down, more in disappointment than for any pre-rehearsed reason. After a brief pause, he returned his gaze to the cameras. The bottom line is that a foreign power has manipulated us into fighting each other, and I'm asking all of you not to fall for it. I implore you not to take up arms against your fellow Americans. With growing conviction, the President added, "To Senator Tate and those Americans who have chosen to fight against our country, I'm offering you a 48-hour amnesty proposition. If you turn yourselves in during these next 2 days, you won't be tried for treason or prosecuted for sedition. However, after these 48 hours have passed, any American caught taking up arms against the federal government will be labeled an unlawful enemy combatant and an enemy of the state. You will be prosecuted. Going forward, any American joining this UN force in Canada will be labeled an unlawful enemy combatant. Your personal property and finances will be seized by the IRS. You will be prosecuted by the Department of Justice upon your capture." To the governors who have recently created their own militia forces, disarm and disband. I don't want to order the military to have to battle these groups, but I will, and they will be destroyed. We are a republic of 50 states. We aren't going to break apart over political differences of opinion or because of outside manipulation. I will fulfill my duty to hold this country together, and we will hold a new presidential election when it is safe. Sachs paused for a moment. Many people have insinuated that I have become a dictator, an emperor, answerable to no one. I am not. I have not suspended the Constitution, nor have I suspended the rule of law. I have ordered the Senate to rapidly begin deliberations to fill the Supreme Court with new justices, and in the absence of Congressman Bork, who has fled to Canada to side with this UN peacekeeping force, I'm asking the newly confirmed Speaker of the House to set a new election date. Because Senator Tate has invalidated himself as a presidential candidate by taking up arms against our country, I'm proposing that the new election be held in November of 2022 to allow enough time for a new challenger from the Democratic Party to be chosen. To further show that I am not a dictator or seeking to take over the country, I am also announcing that I won't seek re-election. My term will end following the new upcoming election. This is my last plea for peace. I ask that Senator Tate and his cohort accept my amnesty terms. so we can defuse this situation before it turns to war. To the UN Secretary-General, Johan Baer, the UN Military Commander, General Guy Mackenzie, and to the member states who have contributed soldiers to this force, I warn you, if you attempt to interfere in our internal affairs, the United States will treat it as a foreign invasion. We will attack you, and we will destroy you. I won't allow foreign troops to operate on our soil. This is your last chance. If you don't heed my words, your forces will feel the full impact of American military might. Turning to look at the directors of the FBI, NSA, and CIA, the president gestured for them to join him at the podium. It was their turn to speak. I now leave you in the capable hands of our senior law enforcement and intelligence officials to outline the case of this foreign interference and influence campaign that has brought our country to this dangerous precipice. As the other officials came forward, the president briefly nodded toward them and headed to one of the side exits, out of the empty briefing room. The president didn't want any press in the room while he gave this monumental speech, and he didn't want his directors harassed by the press when they gave their portions of the brief. This presentation was meant for the public, not the media. If Senator Tate and the UN wouldn't take him up on his offer for peace, then in 48 hours, the country would shift its focus to preparing for war. 4 hours later, Washington, D.C., White House, Situation Room. Ever since a military conflict had become a realistic possibility, the Situation Room had been slowly transformed into what looked like a war room of sorts. In addition to the TV monitors and electronic maps depicting the military situation, the walls were now covered in maps of the U.S.-Canadian border, with little red and blue dots denoting various units. Little icons that looked like planes were pinned to red and blue squares, denoting airfields. On the side of the wall next to the map hung various clipboards that contained additional details of each of the units for quick reference. All this information had been collected and collated in a short span of time to show the men and women deciding the fate of the country exactly what they had to deal with and help them make the best decisions possible if hostilities should officially begin. What caused the president the most alarm was how few combat forces they had arrayed near the border. While they'd placed many of the divisions on alert, they were already experiencing difficulties in getting them ready to move up north from the south. Then they had to contend with the National Guard brigades and divisions, which were having their own problems. In the past, the U.S. could spend months shuffling units around while it got itself mobilized for war. Sadly, they didn't have months to get ready for whatever was coming. Standing next to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the president commented, "I think our Canadian border is a bit naked, don't you?" General Austin Peterson just nodded. "I was thinking the same thing. We've had several of our divisions on alert for deployment for the past week. With your permission, I'd like to go ahead and order a full mobilization of our forces to the north. It's going to take some time to get our forces moved across the country, and I'd like to get that ball rolling. I also think if we make a show of force, we may be able to convince the UN to stand down." "I have to agree, Mr. President," affirmed Secretary of Defense McElroy. "We can order the 10th Mountain Group to take up positions along the border while we mobilize the rest of our guys further south." He pointed at a spot on the map in the Atlantic. "We also have a problem here." "What do you mean by that?" asked the president, crossing his arms. The Chief of National Operations, Admiral Chester Smith, interjected, "One of our submarines that was supposed to be supporting the blockade hasn't checked in. It's possible they crossed over to the other side." General Peterson swore under his breath. "What type of sub is it?" he demanded. "One of our newer Virginia-class subs." McElroy shook his head. "Admiral, you've got to get control of your skippers. We can't have more of our capital ships defecting like this. What help do you need to make sure this stops?" Admiral Smith straightened up. "I've ordered NCIS to start interviewing all of our admirals and senior captains right away. I've also spoken with the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and I've placed his command in charge of making sure we have no more defections. He's placing Marines on every single naval ship and submarine going forward, with explicit orders to make sure this doesn't happen again. That particular sub had set sail prior to that set of orders, but there shouldn't be any further incidents." "Okay, guys. It sounds like the Admiral here has put a decent solution in place to handle this problem, so let's move on," said the President. "His branch isn't the only one seeing defections. We've lost close to 30% of the National Guard units and roughly 20% of the active duty Army and Air Force. So this is cutting across all branches. Hopefully this 48-hour amnesty will convince many of them to return to duty. What units are we going to deploy to the border, and how soon can we get them there?" General Vance Pruitt, the Army Chief of Staff, chimed in. "We're looking to deploy the 3rd Infantry Division to the northeast. The 4th Infantry Division will go to the Dakotas and the northern part of the country, and the 3rd Cavalry Regiment will deploy to the upper Midwest. This will leave us the 1st Cavalry Division, 1st Armored Division, and the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions as a mobile reserve should we need to deploy them. Frankly, I'm hoping that once these UN peacekeepers see how much combat power we've shifted to the Canadian border, they'll back down and call this whole thing off. My only concern is what may happen with these individual state civil defense forces. These CDF groups could pose a problem for us if they opt to fight." "That's a good point," the SecDef replied. "Let's make sure we're coordinating our efforts with Homeland Security and the FBI. I'd like to largely let them handle these militia forces if they stay small. I'd rather keep the regular Army soldiers focused on staring down this foreign army for the time being, instead of going after their fellow Americans." Taking all the information in, the President weighed the different options and authorized the rapid deployment of active duty forces from their home bases to the border. One way or another, they'd know in 48 hours if there would be peace or if conflict was inevitable. Geneva, Switzerland, United Nations Headquarters. Secretary General Johann Baer sat at the head of the long board table as he surveyed the representatives of the Security Council. The empty seat for the representative from the United States seemed to be talking to him. The U.S. ambassador to the UN had been pulled back to Washington when it became clear the UN force was not going to back down from President Sachs's 48-hour warning. Johann had also ordered the headquarters relocated to their alternate location in Geneva to make sure none of the diplomats would be in any immediate danger from the coming conflict. The British ambassador, Sir John Grant, shook his head in disgust. "This is utter madness. You're going to lead the world toward a needless war that will solve nothing and cost the lives of tens of thousands of people," he shouted. "What is utter madness is allowing that illegitimate dictator to remain in power over the most powerful nation on earth," shot back the German ambassador. "Poland won't support this authorization for force," asserted Ambassador Duda. "You may think Sachs is politically wounded and weak, but he still commands the most powerful military in the world. He's already ordered many of their divisions to the Canadian border as we speak. If you go down this path, Mr. Secretary General, you will destroy the UN." The American military forces that were normally on rotation in Poland had already been pulled back to America. Their loss had hurt the Polish economy and put a hold on a growing military relationship between the U.S. and Poland. "Enough. America has been a global bully for decades," retorted Ambassador Karlov of Russia. "They've waged endless wars across the world, deposing leaders they disagree with and looting the developing world of its natural resources in the name of profits. It's time the world unites together and deals with them once and for all. That's rich coming from you, shouted the Polish ambassador, especially considering that you stole Crimea from Ukraine, along with the eastern half of their country. America is the only country that kept you from invading the rest of Eastern Europe. The Crimea has always been a part of Russia, Karlov responded icily. It was Ukraine who stole it from us when they opted to form their own country after the fall of the Soviet Union. The two men stared daggers at each other from across the table. Ambassador Liu Jiyi of China slammed his hand down on the table. Enough! We have a renegade president in charge of America who has turned the world upside down these last 4 years, he asserted angrily. The rest of the room bristled. This was a very unusual outburst of emotion coming from Ambassador Liu. We have been given the opportunity to rid ourselves of this buffoon with the support of at least part of their country and military. We need to seize this opportunity now. China is ready and willing to commit whatever financial and military aid is needed to see this through to victory. Standing, Johann leaned forward, placing his hands on the table so it appeared like he was looking down on them. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to make any long-winded speeches or explanations for why the UN should act. These facts have already been explained. President-elect Marshall Tate and many members of the American government are currently living in exile in Canada because they have been branded enemies of the state by President Sachs. We have support from at least 30, maybe even as high as 40% of the American people. We must act now to stop this madman from taking full dictatorial control of the most powerful military on Earth. If we don't, the 21st century may be a darker period in human history than the last one. I formally put a motion to move forward with forcefully removing President Sachs to a vote. He sat down confidently. It took roughly 5 minutes for the vote to be completed. When it was all said and done, only the UK, Poland, and the Dominican Republic voted against the resolution. The UK, however, used its veto vote, preventing the motion from passing in the UN Security Council. Johann had already known that this would happen and had moved the resolution to the General Assembly for a final vote. That evening, the measure passed, with 130 nations voting in favor of removing Sachs, while 63 members voted against it. With the measure approved, Johann sent a coded message to General Mackenzie to move forward with Operation Spark. Chapter 5. Operation Spark. December 20th, 2020. Rosslyn, Virginia. Key Bridge, Marriott. His plan had better work, or we're all dead men, Joe said as he pulled the Javelin anti-tank guided missile launcher out of one of the black hockey bags. He immediately went to work on setting up the system. Responding without so much as glancing at the man next to him, Lucky retorted, "Shut up and just make sure that thing is ready." Joe Miller and James Cochran, a.k.a. Lucky, were part of an 8-man team that had been directed to make a strategic hit. While they were all prior military, they were currently working for an Irish private military company that had been hired to protect President-elect Marshall Tate. "What are we going to do if they have an armed helicopter with them providing overwatch?" asked Joe. He finished setting up the anti-tank missile, then sat with his back against the lip of the roof. His legs were extended, the anti-tank missile sitting across them. "Hey, you knew the risks when you signed up for this mission," Lucky replied. "If there's an armed helicopter, then we have to hope Delta Team is able to take them out. Chances are they won't have one, not for this short of a trip. The target's just going from the White House to Langley. Plus, the government is closed for the week, so traffic should be light. I sure hope you're right, Lucky. I know I'm right. Now shut up, sit tight, and wait. It shouldn't be much longer. Washington, D.C., White House. Agent Bill Cartwright had been assigned to the President's Secret Service detail now for more than 4 years. When it had become clear that Sachs was going to be the Republican nominee in 2016, his boss had told him he was being promoted and placed in charge of the candidate's security. While Bill was thrilled by the advancement in his career, he hadn't initially respected the man who he'd sworn to protect. In time, though, he had grown to like the president. He might not always like or agree with everything he said or did, but he had a certain appreciation for Sachs as a person. He was a straight shooter, and typically told it like it was, and he was a staunch supporter of law enforcement, even when it wasn't popular. That certainly won him a lot of accolades from the LE community. The past 10 weeks had been rough, not just on the president and the country, but on the Secret Service as an organization. They'd had to field more threats against Sachs in the last 10 weeks than they had during the past 4 years. Now the FBI and the NSA had alerted them that there was a credible threat against the president's life, and this time it was being orchestrated from someone within the West Wing. And that alarmed Bill, not because he was in charge of the president's security, but because someone he knew and worked with on a daily basis was actively planning to kill his charge. The challenge now was trying to flush that person out so they could deal with the insider threat. "Are you sure this is going to work?" asked one of his fellow Secret Service agents. Bill nodded. "Yes. The NSA has confirmed it. We know they're going to ambush the president along the route, and we know how they're going to do it." He could see the looks of concern on the faces before him. These people routinely put their lives on the line to protect the president. But this was something different. He was asking them to be decoys. Bill raised his hand to quiet them down. "Okay, listen up. We know a private military contractor group is going to carry out the actual attack. That means these guys know what they're doing. This isn't some lone wolf crazy guy. These are former military or special forces guys who've been trained to do these exact types of missions, so stay sharp." He paused for a second. "I know you're all nervous, but we need to find out who in the White House is orchestrating this whole thing. That means we have to go through with this plan so we can root them out. We've taken every possible precaution we can, but I can't guarantee that none of you will get hurt. This is a voluntary mission. If you want to opt out, this is your chance. No one will think less of you. But once we leave, we're committed. Is that understood?" Bill asked. He saw the men and women nod their heads in agreement, looks of determination written on their faces. "All right, then let's saddle up and head out," he ordered. He lifted his sleeve to his mouth. "It's time to get Carnegie on the move," he announced. A few minutes went by. The president's vehicle pulled up to the White House side entrance, and a couple of agents unfurled some umbrellas to help block the view of the president leaving the building as he climbed in. Once POTUS was situated inside the Beast, as his vehicle was commonly called, it made its getaway from the White House grounds. As they drove past the main gate, the rest of the security detail formed up, and the small convoy drove down 17th Street until they hit Constitution Avenue and turned right, heading toward the on-ramp of the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge on their way to the George Washington Memorial Parkway. From there, it was a pretty easy trip to the CIA headquarters in McLean. Fort Meade, Maryland, NSA headquarters. "Got it!" shouted one of the SIGINT analysts who'd been monitoring all electronic activity happening on the White House grounds. The RQ-4 Global Hawk, that had been loitering some 10,000 feet above D.C., had been specifically monitoring all signals emanating from the White House for the past few hours in preparation for this very moment. "What do you have, Shelley?" asked Leah Riesling as she walked over to her terminal. "A one-word text message to an unknown number in New York. When it reached that phone, that connection shotgunned the text out to 10 different phones in Rosslyn, Virginia." "Whoa, that was fast. What did the message say?" Leah asked. "Do we know who sent it? And do we have the locations in Rosslyn it was sent to?" "Share the data with us. We'll track some of that down for you," called out another coworker. They all wanted to get in on the action. It wasn't every day you got to stop a presidential assassination. Shelley looked at the cell phone number that had sent the call and raised an eyebrow. Without speaking, she motioned for Leah to come closer. Leah leaned in and looked at who the number belonged to and did a double-take. "Are you sure?" she asked. "1 minute. I'm going to look at the CCTV cameras we put in place. I'll know in a second." Shelley and Leah watched as they pulled up the footage from the room the text message had been sent from and pulled it back to the exact timestamp of when the message had been sent. Once they'd narrowed it down, they zoomed in and saw the traitor, the person who had deliberately sent a message letting their co-conspirators know the president was in the vehicle and on his way to the ambush point. Leah looked at Shelley. "Keep this between us," she said in low tones. "I'm going to get the director. We need to alert the FBI and Secret Service as well." "You've got it, boss," Shelley answered. "I've got the locations in Rosslyn now," announced one of the other analysts. "It appears several of them are located at the Marriott, and a few are at other points along the GW Parkway." Using the drone's advanced cameras, they swiftly identified several attackers lying in wait with what appeared to be some sort of anti-tank weapons, ready to deploy when the president's motorcade arrived in the kill box. The NSA director had just walked into the room a moment before. "Alert the detail of the pending attack," he barked. "Have our agents move in now to apprehend the attackers. Take them alive if you can, but dead or alive, take them down." He swiftly spotted Leah and made his way over to her. "I heard you found our traitor," he said quietly. Nodding, Leah pointed down at the frozen image of the person holding the phone. Shaking his head, the NSA director replied, "I never would have thought. Let's make sure the president knows, and let's figure out how we can use that person to our advantage." Key Bridge, Marriott. Peering his head slightly over the lip of the roof of the hotel, Lucky still didn't see the president's motorcade yet. He reached down and looked at the timestamp on the text message. That was 5 minutes ago, he realized. Something's not right. "Did they take a different route?" asked Joe as he nervously fidgeted with the javelin. "I don't know. Let me check something," Lucky replied. He reached for his pocket binoculars. Placing them up to his eyes, he scanned further down the GW to see if he could spot the motorcade. There they are. What are they doing? He wondered. Instead of turning onto the GW to head in their direction, the convoy had stayed on I-66 and now appeared to be parked along the side of the road, not moving at all. Suddenly, he had a sick feeling in his stomach. "Drop the missile. We need to get out of here. It's a trap," Lucky said in an urgent voice. He swiftly put the binoculars down and reached over for his pistol. "I knew this was too good to be true," Joe responded. He released his grip on the javelin and pulled his own pistol out. The two of them got up and dashed toward the rooftop exit they'd left partially ajar. They got within 15 feet of the door when it suddenly busted open. In the flash of an eye, several men clad in black body armor with yellow lettering that read FBI across the front of it appeared, guns at the ready. Before Lucky could even say anything, Joe brought his pistol up and fired off a shot. Lucky watched Joe get hit multiple times in the chest before he fell backwards, riddled with bullets. Not wanting to share the same fate, Lucky threw his pistol on the ground and raised his hands as quickly as he could, all the while cringing in anticipation of his own death. "Down on the ground," shouted one of the FBI agents. Lucky dropped to the ground, making sure his hands were fully extended and open. A string of gunshots went off a little further away, probably from one of the other ambush teams. More agents stormed the roof of an adjacent building in search of the other attackers. An FBI agent ran up to Lucky and patted him down before throwing a set of handcuffs on him. In mere seconds, he found himself being led down the stairs to an uncertain future. President's Motorcade. Sachs breathed a sigh of relief when the head of his Secret Service detail, Bill Cartwright, told him they'd successfully thwarted the attempt on his life. "This is getting out of control," he thought. Just then the secured phone in his vehicle chirped. The other agents in the vehicle, all heavily laden with body armor and weapons, watched him as he reached over and answered the phone. "This is the President," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. President, this is Deputy Director Tony Wilds from the NSA. We have the assassins in custody, and we've identified the traitor. Before you ask, I have a proposition for you." Sachs looked at the receiver quizzically. "First, tell me who the person is that betrayed us." A brief pause ensued before Tony responded. "It's Deputy National Security Advisor Ava Marks. She's the one who sent the text message that you had left the White House. Once we knew it was her, we backtraced all her text messages, phone calls, and any other piece of electronic data we could over the last 3 months. She sent a number of encrypted messages, all to a person in New York. We're still tracking down who that person is, but right now, she's the mole." The President let out a stream of obscenities. Tony cleared his throat. "Sir, what I wanted to propose was, now that we know it's her, we could spin this," he offered. "We could selectively use her to leak misinformation to whoever her handlers are. This could give us a leg up on whatever is coming next." Sachs thought about that for a moment. It might be an advantage to use her like that. But at the same time, leaving her in place to continue spying for whoever she was leaking information to could continue to hurt them. "God only knows who else is working with her," Sachs thought. Returning his attention to the phone in his hand, the President replied, "No, have her detained. I want her interrogated. I know we could use her to leak false information, but I don't know that we can contain what she'll see and learn of our future plans, not in her current position. Let's find out what she knows, and maybe we can uncover some of her co-conspirators." "I understand, Mr. President," Tony replied. "I'll let the FBI know of your decision. Stay safe on your way back, sir. Until we know who else she's working with, there may be other plots we'll need to look out for." The call disconnected, and the President looked nervously to his Secret Service agents. "Okay, boys, let's head back to the barn. Good job today saving my bacon, and yours as well." His usually stoic counterparts allowed themselves to smile ever so slightly at that comment. 3 days later, Washington, D.C., White House, Situation Room. The President and the National Security Council were still in a bit of shock at the revelation that there was a mole in their midst. They all knew Ava personally and had worked together with her in the NSC for the past 2 years. "I still can't believe she was working to undermine me and my agenda the entire time," thought Sachs. "All right, Polanski, tell me what you've got," the President said. He needed to wrap his head around what could have caused this woman to participate in an attempt on his life. "Yes, sir," answered the FBI director. "Well, during the interrogation, Ava revealed that she was initially approached around 2 years ago by 3 men. At the time, they were asking simply for information that could be used against you, mostly about trade deals with Europe. She said that she initially refused, but then they showed her pictures of her kids and told her that if she didn't comply, they would be kidnapped and returned to her one piece at a time. "Has the FBI secured her family?" Sachs asked. "We have," Director Polanski confirmed. "Once she saw they were safe, that's when she began spilling the beans on everything else she knew." The president nodded. "So, what else did she have to say?" he inquired. "For nearly a year, they had asked her to provide details about trade deals with the EU and China, but that was about it. They would also occasionally send her a picture of one or both of her kids playing at a park, or in a school, or at some restaurant, to remind her that they were still watching her. When you found out about the election shenanigans, they tasked her with keeping tabs on what the NSC was doing and what your next moves were. They then told her to propose that you travel to Langley to give a pep talk to the staff there, in preparation for what was about to come. She was told that once it had been arranged, she was to send a one-word message, spark, when you left the White House. After that was done, they promised they'd leave her alone. The president was torn for a moment between feelings of anger and betrayal and a sense of compassion for Ava. He was very grateful that the Secret Service had been tasked with protecting his family, and he couldn't imagine what he would do to protect the people he loved the most. His mind drifted down the rabbit hole for a moment until Polanski pulled him back. "Mr. President?" he asked. Yes, Sachs responded. "So tell me, Polanski, did we get any useful intel out of her?" "Unfortunately, a lot of the names she's given us have already crossed over to Senator Tate's faction in Canada, so she's not providing a lot of new information. That said, we just identified the person she was sending the messages to in New York." The president nodded and uncrossed his arms, hopeful that this might turn into a solid lead. "The number was to a burner phone that was later traced back to a 7-Eleven store in Queens. We checked with the store, and it just so happens that this particular location has been robbed more than a few times over the past several years, so the store owner has all of his CCTV video backed up at a remote location. We acquired the data and reviewed all the people who bought burner phones over the last 2 months. It took us a while to crunch the data, but with some help from the NSA, we were able to identify 8 individuals who bought burner phones from that store. We ran their facial images through the NSA, CIA, DoD, and Homeland Security databases, and turned up a hit to 2 of them from the DoD's records. The other 6 individuals were nothing of note. Please tell me we know who these guys are. It better not just be a match to some obscure piece of information the DoD collected, Patty Hogan asserted. The president chuckled. Patty had made her opinion about the Department of Defense's biometric database well known in the past. He remembered her referring to the DoD as a vacuum cleaner that sucked up information without knowing if it might be valuable one day. Brushing aside Patty's comment, Polanski continued. "As it turns out, the 2 individuals are active members of the German KSK, or Kommando Spezialkräfte, German Special Forces. They had apparently gone through a very specialized training program back in the early 2010s that U.S. Special Operations Command Europe had been providing to selective NATO members." "Whoa. These were German Special Forces? Exactly what kind of training did we provide them with?" asked the president. He leaned forward, his interest now piqued. General Vance Pruitt, the Army Chief of Staff, replied. "Counterintelligence and kidnapping operations. Essentially, we trained them to do exactly what they did to Ava and her family. God knows who else they've blackmailed and done this to." The general shook his head solemnly. This wasn't the first time U.S. Special Forces had provided some very specific training to an allied force, only to have that exact training turned and used against them. "Where are they now?" asked Robert Gray, the man who'd first hired Ava to work on his staff at the NSC. The president looked at Robert and could easily detect that the man was broken. He obviously felt utterly betrayed by what had happened with his deputy. "We have them under surveillance now that we know who we're looking for," Polanski explained. "We're not sure how they entered the country just yet, or who else they're working with, but we'll know more in the coming days as we keep them under surveillance. Eventually, they'll meet up with someone else or make a phone call. When they do, we'll begin to see who else they're connected to." Patty Hogan readjusted her ponytail. "Geez, if we have German special forces running long-term kidnap and counterintelligence operations on our soil, how many other European nations are doing the same?" she asked. "Hell, they may have other sabotage teams ready to carry out all sorts of attacks if given the order." "Don't worry, Patty," responded CIA Director Nick Olson nonchalantly. "We've got our own teams all over Europe, Russia, and China, ready to execute missions of our own, should it come down to it." "That doesn't help us here at home, Nick," she retorted. "It's called mutually assured destruction, Patty. It does help, in its own way," he shot back. Nick then turned to face Sachs. "Mr. President, one of my senior staff members, Paige Larson, flipped to Tate's side right after the election. She's a wealth of information to him, and I'm certain she's been briefing their side on nearly every contingency plan we've put in place for something like this. I can't say for certain that she doesn't have friends still in the agency providing her with information, so there is a good chance that Tate, and by proximity this UN peacekeeping force, is learning everything we're talking about in these meetings, or what we're going to do next. I know you've been trying to give all sides a chance to end this peacefully and return the country to some semblance of order, but we've moved past that point." Nick paused for a moment as he surveyed the military members in the room. "We need to start cleaning house and preparing for war. We need to move rapidly to identify who's not on Team USA and purge them from the government. We also need to order the military to enforce the blockade of Canada and prepare to disarm this army on our northern border, by force if necessary. We also need to address these militias and stop them from getting any larger than they are." Then he turned to look at the FBI director. "I just read a report from Nolan's group that said more than 6 new militia groups have sprung up across the country, with their membership numbers estimated to have swelled past 100,000 people. This is a brewing disaster, Mr. President. We can't have partisan militia units forming in our states. People are getting way too riled up from all the crap going on with Facebook, Twitter, and all these other social media platforms. I fear we're on the cusp of some really brutal stuff about to be unleashed on the country." The president turned to his attorney general. "Malcolm, what thoughts do you have about what we can do concerning these militia forces?" "We continue to work with the local police departments to help us in identifying who these individuals are. We look through their social media posts and see what they're saying. If we spot them making threats of violence against any person, group, or the government, we use existing laws and we apprehend them, or at least temporarily seize their weapons under various red flag laws. It's about the best we can do without violating people's rights," the AG surmised. Sachs nodded in approval. "Then see to it," he ordered. The president tapped on the table. "Now to the military situation. General Peterson, I want the military ready to protect the country and deal with this foreign threat as soon as possible. It's imperative that we're ready to handle whatever is coming next. I have a feeling we're about to get nailed by an unseen tsunami."
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.